Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that for updates on the show, be sure to follow me on Twitter at OmerQ_. Again, that's at OMERQ_. And if you like the show, please consider supporting it by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or following the show on Spotify so that you get notified when a new episode is released. Also, be sure to send it to your friends. We don't ask you to give us money, just support the show by helping it grow. Just a few easy clicks. That's all it takes. It doesn't cost you a dime, and you can do it in no time. So please consider doing that, and let's get to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Joining me today to talk about third parties and more specifically the role of libertarians in this presidential election is the Chief Justice of Maryland Student Government Association and a devoted libertarian, Ben Birnbach. Ben, how are you doing, my man?
Omer, I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm great. Just chilling like a villain. Before we start, I just wanted to start with a little aside. So you and I met about 2 years ago when we both worked on a U.S. Senate campaign for an independent candidate. I remember when I was walking in there, I didn't really know what to expect, right? This was my first big campaign. I didn't know, what it was like to work for an independent. And I'm a, loud, nerdy, progressive Muslim. And I just remember walking in there, again, not knowing what to expect. First thing I hear is and see is this loud, nerdy, Jewish libertarian. And I think you were talking about something crazy like driver's licenses and why we technically don't need them. You might have been playing devil's advocate on that position, but
right, yeah.
But yeah, no, I just remember, and it's wild because I think in the beginning we really didn't get along too well because we would butt heads on some of those issues. But then as we got to know each other, I think we really got, become good friends and really get an understanding of each other's issues.
Right. I mean, and that's the biggest thing, right? It's like, how do we as a country, how do we move forward and how do we have conversations with other people? And how do we get past these tough issues if we don't like the people we're talking to, right? And
Exactly.
If there's no baseline, if there's no common respect, then the ability to get far down into an ideological discussion, you can't even do that at that point. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a unique scenario for me too, because, I had lived a pretty closeted life up to that point. I hadn't really met too many people, outside of my circle, outside of my community. And talking to other people about your ideas will either prove you wrong or sharpen your ideas. And I think that's the best way we can go about discussing ideological issues.
I think for sure. And especially working on that campaign where you had people from all around like the political spectrum. Like you had conservatives, you had like progressives, establishment Democrats, everybody on that campaign.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And, kind of sticking with this and like you and I personally know how difficult it is for a third party or someone who's non-affiliated with the main two parties to try to just get on the ballot. Because
virtually impossible.
Virtually impossible. Hey, but we did it. Explain to me your views right now on the two-party system and how that is a hindrance for outsider candidates.
So, I mean, I think the biggest thing to understand with our two-party system is the fact that we have always had it pretty much since, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, and we are most likely to always have it. And that's primarily due to our first past the post electoral system. And I don't really see much in terms of minor reform that can really break it out of the two-party system, but I think it's crucial that we do. You have this thing where the two parties, they want to present themselves as polar opposites to the electorate. They want to present themselves as, okay, it's us or the other evil party, right? And the biggest thing is that these parties are actually really similar. You're not getting that many policy. You're getting pretty centric American politics on either party, and it's not very different, but they would like to convince you otherwise. And they'd like to convince you that, hey, if you don't vote for us, the other side's evil. Right. Now, it's a lot harder to do that in other systems, right? In England or, in even Australia, where, there are many more parties. They have multi-party systems. And, in those types of systems, people like me and people like you, our views get represented significantly better. Right. Because there can be a libertarian party that is actually worth voting for. And there can be a progressive party that's actually worth voting for. And you and I don't need to spend our time and our votes voting for people that we really don't believe in that strongly. And so I think when you talk about like the lethargy of our voters and you talk about the fact that we really have low voter turnout rates, it's because nobody's motivated to go vote for candidates that they had to compromise on in the first place.
Exactly. And like one of the things I especially learned from our campaign that we worked on was like you and I went to Allegheny County, right? Remember?
Right.
We went out to Cumberland, Maryland, where nobody goes to. It's out in the mountains, out west. It's like if you went there, you would never even think that you're in Maryland. But
right, yeah.
We go there and we're talking to voters and we're saying, hey, we work for, Neil Simon, U.S. Senate. And they're like, oh, wow, you're like the first candidate for U.S. Senate I've seen out here in my entire life. That speaks to this sense of detachment that a lot of voters have from their elected officials. You don't have because you don't see like people like, like in this case, you don't see people like Ben Cardin going out to Cumberland, Maryland, or going all the way out to the Eastern Shore to go meet with people and shake hands and kiss babies and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of it is just rooted in, okay, I need to win in Baltimore. I need to win in these big cities. And that's all I'm going to work for.
Yeah, so you're not gonna catch Ben Cardin out in Allegheny County.
Never.
Right.
And and that sense of detachment, I think, is what's led to our system, like what's led to people being this disgruntled about politics, people being this lethargic, like you said, about politics. And, we're actually coming up on, or I think we just passed the 224th anniversary of George Washington's farewell address. And in that farewell address, I'll just read an excerpt from it. However, political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. And for a lot of people, that might sound like a lot of big words that, don't make a lot of sense, but the gist of it is political parties inherently make the system, I think, corrupt. And they corrupt politicians because they only have to work for a certain subsect of the population. They only have to think a certain way. And eventually when they get your vote, they're going to put your issues aside, or they're going to push policies that might not necessarily be in your favor. They might be in the favor of whoever's paying them the most or whoever's donating to their campaign the most.
Right. And, in our system, it makes sense, right? It would make sense if it was in George Washington's view, right? Like if we had no parties and, you just have one guy running against another guy, I think our system makes perfect sense. But when you fill it in with these red and blue parties, that's when the system becomes a lot worse. And I think George Washington obviously said it better than either of the two of us can say it. But the bottom line is, what he's getting at is, when you have this party system, the party is eventually going to become more important to the member of Congress or the politician than the actual institution they belong to.
Absolutely.
And so for my favorite congressman, right, he recently got called out by Donald Trump, but he basically called this guy a wacko, called him a third-rate grandstander. His name is Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky. And Thomas Massie has wonderfully exposed the Republican Party for basically, if you want a committee assignment, and this is pretty much how it works in the Democratic Party as well. If you want a committee assignment, you have to raise a certain amount of money.
Right.
And so if you want to be on a powerful committee like Ways and Means, or the committee that decides, taxes and spending and that sort of thing, right? If you want to be on that committee, you got to be raising a lot of money. And so I think the question then arises, it's okay, what are you saying to people to fundraise all this money? What promises are you giving out? How is it that all of our congressmen that love talking about how they are just, they're representing their constituents, they're taking thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars from, random contributors, and
they're spending all of their time. They're not making policy. Most of the time is spent on call time.
Exactly. It's call time. And we even saw, we saw the candidate that we were working for, we saw him do call time. And, Neil, I think, was an example of somebody that actually wanted to make a difference.
But with Neil, he would go out in the field every single day, shake hands, meet voters, and talk to them about their problems. He would listen to them. His policies even evolved. Like, I saw it over time. His policies even evolved based on who he talked to. And, he would, and he
that's how it should be.
And that's how it should be. Exactly. And it speaks to another thing that you mentioned earlier. There's a reason why people like you and me who we might agree on things, like foreign policy, we might have some overlap on foreign policy, we might have some overlap on social issues, but economically and fiscally, you and I are as far apart as anyone could probably
Right.
be, right?
Yeah.
But there's a reason that you and I can agree on the fact that this system is wrong and it's rigged, and it's because of the fact that, politics, it's not just left and right, it's also up and down. There's the left wing and the right wing. Then up is like more neocons and neoliberals, and then down is probably more libertarians. And we'll actually get into what that actually means, because there's a lot of differences about what libertarianism actually is. But my point is that I think the way that you and I feel, which is disgruntled with the neoconservative and neoliberal policies of the current day and the past like 50 years, let's be honest, these policies have failed a lot of the American people. They failed our congressional system. They failed our law. A lot of people who try to run for office and do good things. A lot of third party and independent candidates who want to go out and make real change to help people. And whether, I don't necessarily agree with libertarians on a lot of things, but when I see someone who's running for a libertarian candidate like Joe Jorgensen or even Gary Johnson, I don't think that they're inherently bad people. I don't think that they're inherently corrupt. I think it takes a lot of courage to run an outsider campaign like that. And I think it takes a lot of planning to actually get as far as they did. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and, Gary Johnson, he had the benefit of running against the two most unpopular candidates in the history of electoral politics in America. So, I had a lot more excitement about Gary Johnson than I do for Joe Jorgensen. Gary Johnson was an elected governor of the state of New Mexico. He, had already had somewhat of a national presence. And, with all due respect to Joe Jorgensen, I had no idea who she was before this election started. And also Gary Johnson was running against, neither of them were incumbents. And so it was maybe a possibility.
Gary Johnson also had the benefit of being a former governor and having some sort of name recognition, at least in regional politics.
Right. He had held more elected office up to that point than Donald Trump had. Right. So there was a chance there. And I understood. And I know I didn't think to myself, okay, Gary Johnson's going to win. I thought, okay, at least we can say to the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, hey, I'm an 18-year-old, I'm a 19-year-old, and I disagree with your party so much that I'm literally willing to throw my vote at somebody who has almost an infinitesimally small chance of winning.
Yeah.
Just because I don't want you to have my vote. Right? That sends a message. And I think that's what a lot of these third-party votes are, is they're protest votes. And, progressives and even sometimes conservatives get very upset because they say, well, okay, you're just giving your vote to Donald Trump, or you're just giving your vote to Joe Biden.
It's not true at all.
I think that's such a logically fallacious. I don't think that's a fair claim whatsoever. It's like, no, I'm just voting for who I want to vote for.
Exactly.
I don't owe you my vote.
I've always said that it's the candidate's job to convince the voters to vote for them. Yeah. If you cannot convince someone who hates the other candidate equally as much as he hates you, you cannot convince that person to vote for you. If you cannot change your policies around a large subset of the population that does feel that way, it's not fake news. It's not just hyperbole. This is true. Let's be honest about someone like Joe Biden. 10 million people in the Democratic primary voted for Bernie Sanders. And Joe Biden has done virtually zero outreach to progressives. The Democratic Party have aligned themselves with moderates and moderate conservatives in order to build a more big tent moderate party while alienating their wing. And eventually it's going to get to a point where you're not going to get those votes back.
Right. Well, and this is where median voter theorem really comes into play. And for your listeners that aren't aware of what that is, it's basically just the concept that parties are more likely to move to the middle after the primary so they can appeal to the most voters possible. Right. And so I think that's been a very classic fixture of American politics. But from a criticism from many, I think from your ideology progressives, they say, well, it didn't work last time. Hillary tacked to the center and she lost.
Well, if I can, my criticism isn't that it didn't work last time. I mean, that's one of my minor criticisms. My bigger criticism is the lack of outreach following the end of the primary, because Joe Biden, he locked it up in April. He locked it up in March. Let's be honest. Okay. And he had about 4 or 5 months there before the debate, before he had to really ramp up on the general election to tell progressives and to tell them and say, hey, these are the issues that you care about. These are the issues I know you care about. And I might not be the perfect candidate, but here's what I'm going to do, and kind of lay out something. The issue is he hasn't really given much to progressives to want to vote for him.
I think it's kind of it's a tricky position, right? Because he has to think to himself, or whoever's doing the thinking for him, they have to think to themselves, okay, if we tack to the left and we pick up a couple progressive policy proposals, what's the risk and reward? If we pick up 100 progressive votes, how many centrist votes of suburban white housewives are going to be turned off from our progressive policies, right? Like, and that's the thing. Like, that's probably who won Donald Trump the election last time. Would you agree with me on that? Suburban White House.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with you on that. But I think what also lost Hillary Clinton the election in 2016 was the fact that she couldn't get young people enthusiastic enough to come out and vote. And I
think that might have something to do with Cedar Rapids, right? I mean, she just clearly wasn't the type of candidate that aroused any sort of excitement within young people. And I don't think Biden is doing that either, by the way.
It's really sad because I think this time around, a lot of progressives, they wanted a reason to vote for Biden and vote Trump out of office. That's what they wanted. They wanted something palatable, something they could have, something that would help them and be like, okay, I'm fine with this. But when you give them virtually nothing and nothing to root for, nothing to get excited about, like these young people like you and me, we're very policy driven people. And if the policy's just not there, then we're not going to be as excited to come out and vote. We're not going to be as excited to go campaign for your campaign. We're not going to be as excited to go out in the sun every single day collecting 10,000 signatures like we were 2 years ago.
Right, yeah.
I think that's where the Biden campaign, especially following the primary and given how much time they had, I think that's their biggest critical failure. And that's something that I think is going to hurt him in the election, because the Republicans were going to call Joe Biden a socialist and a communist anyway. This is the same routine we've been going through ever since Reagan. They've called every single Democratic candidate a socialist, commie, anti-Christian, Like, I even saw a guy out there say, oh, Biden's in bed with Al-Qaeda. And I was like, really? But that just speaks to, that's mainly the Republican base. That's the people who are going to vote Republican no matter what. And I don't think a lot of, suburban educated moderates are really going to look at Joe Biden and say, okay, he's definitely not a socialist. He's not a communist. We know what Joe Biden is. He's an Obama Democrat. And
right.
For
and
a lot of them, that's
fair.
good.
I think that's fair. But just to put in, a little bit of context, I think it is fair to say that the Democratic Party's ideology today is based in Marxism. Whether they follow that all the way to the end.
They definitely don't follow it. They definitely don't follow it.
No, but the basic idea of dividing everybody up into different groups and then comparing the different groups with each other and talking about, okay, well, this group gets A and this group gets B. The idea of splitting us up and making us into different groups is a Marxist idea, and the Democrats love that. And I don't think it's an unfair criticism to say that they are Marxists. I just think it's an unfair criticism to say that they're actually trying to put in place socialist policies. Now, that's actually maybe a fair criticism for, the more left the more left-wing aspect of the Democratic Party. But
right.
I agree with you that it's probably not a fair criticism for a man that was more conservative than, Joe Biden's had a long political career. He was calling kids super predators and putting, he passed the civil, what's it called? The, better than I do.
You mean the crime bill?
The crime bill in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Joe Biden's had a long career of not being very progressive. So I agree with you that it is completely fair to say that it's an unfair criticism.
Ben, there's a lot of debate as to what libertarianism actually means, because nowadays you have the libertarian left, which identifies, I guess, with a more Bernie Sanders, Green Party approach to politics. And you have the libertarian right, which is, when people think of that, it's more like, Rand Paul or, the Gary Johnson, like you mentioned. And I know you have a very nuanced view of what libertarianism is. So why don't you just tell everyone, in your eyes, what is libertarianism?
So libertarianism is one of those super, super complicated things, and every libertarian is gonna tell you something different. So to start off, to give everybody
It's their right to tell you something different, isn't it?
Right, exactly. So it's the right to tell you something different. So to put it the most basic, the way that Gary Johnson was phrasing it to everybody, it's socially liberal, fiscally conservative. That is the simplest way to put it. Now, to get a little bit more complex, it's the idea that you should basically, whether it's in the bedroom or in someone's wallet, you should leave people alone and let them make their own choices if they are educated, informed adults. Right, so that's basically the crux of it. But then you start, you kind of made the question a little complicated because you talked about left libertarianism versus right libertarianism, right? So then if you get in even deeper, right, what are those two concepts? There's I think you correctly identified right libertarianism. It's the Rand Paul, the Ron Paul, the Gary Johnson. But then in terms of left-wing libertarianism, I would contend that doesn't exist, and that the very concepts of left-wing and libertarianism are incompatible. That being said, there actually is a place on Earth that has a left-wing libertarian government. It's called Rojava, and it's not internationally recognized, but it's this weird place. It's like a Kurdish sort of state, and it is, I believe it's in Syria, but honestly, I really don't know. And basically, these Kurds have claimed out this little piece of land, and basically what they do is it's almost like a commune in a sense. Like everybody contributes to the common idea. So I guess it's like libertarianism. It's like left-wing libertarianism is almost like the freedom of right libertarianism without currency. And without the same concept of, they might have a currency, but it's like not, it's like libertarianism without capitalism. And again, it's almost antithetical, right? It's like, how do you combine those two ideas? And maybe the reason I can't give you a great answer on left or libertarianism is because I personally don't understand it that well. So I can recognize my own limitation there. But to sort of expand on what right-wing libertarianism is, and that's more of what we consider to be the standard American libertarianism. To explain that in the context of our system, it's like, okay, well, the Republicans, right? The Republicans, they don't agree with libertarians on anything. We used to agree with Republicans on fiscal issues. We don't anymore because Donald Trump has come in and he's changed that party from the party of fiscal conservatism to the party of fiscal Donald Trumpism.
Right.
And so it's this weird thing where
just real quick, what do you actually think of as fiscal Donald Trumpism?
The idea that you can just lower taxes and not lower spending, and suddenly somehow that's just going to make our debt or deficit go away. He let's not forget his campaign promise when he came in and told us that he was going to slash the debt. Right. That is nonsense, and it pisses me off more than anything because people don't realize what the debt is, and a lot of progressives actually don't even think the debt matters. But what the debt will do is it will come back on us in a later generation. It will come back on our children. It will come back on our grandchildren, and it will make it impossible to go, like, interest rates will soar. It'll make it impossible to go out for do things like car loans, house loans, mortgages, things like that. If there's no money, if the price on loaned money becomes so expensive and interest rates go up so much, it will be a bad time to be an American. It really will be. And, people also have a lot of misconceptions about what the debt is. And the debt, most of our debt is not owed to China or owed to any other country. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to our future generations. But, an unbalanced sheet, is going to result in problems in the long term. And Donald Trump is a businessman, but a businessman who's ran dozens of companies into the ground may not understand this, right? And it's he should understand it, but he may not. And then there's the other side, right? So libertarians think, okay, Donald Trump, you lowered taxes. you lower taxes. That's pretty good. We might lower taxes too if we could also lower spending. But I have no interest in lowering taxes if we can't also lower spending, because the debt is more important than just having low taxes, right?
Right.
And so on the other end of the spectrum, right, the Democrats, so Democrats, when they look at the debt, they don't even care about it. And they don't, you have AOC progressives that really show no indication of the debt matters. And I confidently believe that both parties are content on running out the debt and until it's the next generation's problem. And so,
Ben, I would argue that it's not that the debt doesn't matter. It's so the issue with, I think, specifically the debt and how it relates to a lot of progressive policies is, how do you reconcile the systematic economic, social, and political problems we have in the country with the debt? And I think there's been progress made as far as how to pay for a lot of these things without contributing significantly to the national debt.
You can't.
I wouldn't say that, because you had plans out from Bernie Sanders, you had plans out from Elizabeth Warren that.
No, we might be able to afford one plan. You could probably pick one of their progressive policy proposals and we could probably do it. But then the problem becomes, okay, if you want to do every single one of those progressive policy proposals and you want to only tax the rich to do it and you don't want to increase middle-class taxes to pay for all these programs, then you have to essentially tax billionaires at like 100% tax rate, right? Which is fine. If you don't believe that billionaires should have that money in the first place and you believe that they're just leeches on society and taking money from everybody else, then sure, right? That's fine. So we can get rid of billionaires. So then let's get rid of the billionaires and let's pay for all those programs, right? So then now all the billionaires are gone and these programs have been paid for maybe 7 or 8 years. Then the question becomes, okay,
how do you consistently pay for it?
How do we consistently pay for it? How do we sustainably pay for these things?
Okay.
And I don't believe there's an answer. So while I do think we're capable of paying for it, while the same way I think we can also run the debt up probably another 10 trillion, we shouldn't. And eventually there will be consequences for our actions.
Right.
And that's really where I come down on that sort of thing.
Okay. And but here's the thing, and this is the part where I think I diverge from you, especially fiscally, is, so I believe a lot of what, right-wing libertarians believe, and, a lot of people who believe in unregulated free market capitalism believe, is, in my opinion, for it to work, everyone needs to be starting, or everyone needs to have the equal opportunity to succeed in that system.
Right.
And the issue in America is we don't have that for every single person, given our history with African Americans, our history with immigrants, given the systematic problems we have politically in fundraising, politically in people giving money for their own special interests to political candidates, and those candidates holding those fundraisers, holding those corporate donors more in their interest than the interests of their actual constituents. Those issues are what make me kind of be like, okay, if we're going to reform the country and truly do it in the way that you're saying, okay, I'm fine with that. But if we're going to get to that point, there's a lot of work to be done in order to get to what you're saying in the society that I think that you want. We need to equal the playing field, because the person who has, let's say, like the person who has $500 million in his bank account compared to the person who has like $10,000 in their bank account, no matter what, that person who has $500 million, he's going to do whatever is in his best interest to keep his money. And also on top of that, stop other people from getting money if it means it hurts his worth, it hurts his net profits, and it hurts his overall gains, right? So I think that's where that's like where the disconnect is. And I think we can get to a point where what you're saying works. It's just, we need to do a lot of stuff in between to get there. Like,
So you said a lot there, and there's a bunch of things that I'd really want to touch on.
Go for it.
I'd say the first thing, right? See, there's so many avenues I could take this, right? I could argue in a defense of capitalism. I could.
Well, I mean, I'm not. I just want to make things clear. I'm not against capitalism. I'm just against.
You're against unfettered capitalism.
Yep, I'm against capitalism where the opportunity isn't equal for every single person.
Okay, so you actually said something really interesting there, and I would challenge that most progressives don't actually agree with you there. So I agree that that we should have equality. I agree that we should have equality of opportunity. What I don't believe in is I don't believe in equity, and I don't believe in the equality of outcome.
Okay.
Because those are very, very different things.
Why don't you believe in that?
Well, first of all, I would challenge you to believe that I don't believe that I think progressives think that the quality of outcome is more important than the quality of opportunity. But the reason that I think the equality of opportunity is more important is because you need to give people the opportunity to fail for them to have the ability to succeed. There's just simply like, to put an example, right? Like Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, all these, titans of industry, or robber barons, however you want to frame it. These guys all risked something early on, whether it was somebody else's investment money, whatever. They risked them being. They risk thousands of dollars, right? So it's the idea of like, okay, so let's say like this equality of opportunity, I think, is important, because I want youth growing up in inner cities to have the same opportunities that I was fortunate enough to have, right? I want them to have those opportunities, and I would work with you and fight with you every step of the way to give them those opportunities. But then when you say to me, okay, well, you ended up better than this person. The reason I defend the equity of opportunities, because I agree with you. It's like, why should some random kid who grew up in unfortunate circumstances not have the same opportunities in the same country as anybody else?
Right.
I think that's fair, right? And so I want to work with you, and I'll fight with you every step of the way to give that kid the same opportunities and work to give that kid the same opportunities. That being said, I will not work with you if that kid makes mistakes after having the same opportunity as everybody else. Like, I believe that there should be a social safety net. Yeah. I just don't believe it should be, like an all-encompassing basket.
You mentioned a lot of progressives don't think the way I do, but I think one person in the progressive movement, or he's at least aligned himself with the progressive movement, is Andrew Yang. And if you look at some of what he says and the way he talks about UBI and, the way he even phrases it, the freedom dividend, it actually is rooted, I think, in a very, in like a very libertarian free market values, because he wants to equal the playing field through UBI. And we can argue whether or not that's an effective way to do that, but he wants to try to equal the playing field to give people more opportunity so they can focus more on, getting that small business, or, getting that good job that they want, or whatever. Right.
Mm-hmm. And right off the bat, I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you, but right off the bat, I mean, I agree with you on, like, if you were to say, okay, let's take every single one of our welfare programs, let's liquidate it, and then let's put it into UBI, and then take off the top 20% of earners and just give it to the bottom 80%. You have me right now and right there. I will support that instantly, because one, you don't have all this money going into the bureaucracy of government. It's not being wasted. It's literally going into the hands of the people that it's supposed to go to. That's my criticism with every single government program, is it's just you're wasting money on government employees.
No, like a lot of government, even in this, me as a progressive, I agree with the ideas of some of these government programs, but their execution is awful. Like,
right, and that's where charity needs to come in, because charity is actually accountable. Charity can actually be effective in helping people, and although they can't operate at the same scale of government, they operate so much more effectively. And it's also moral. It's moral to give your money to somebody, to like voluntarily give your money to help somebody. It's not moral to have your money stolen from you by the government at force of gunpoint then given to somebody. That's not morally right.
I agree with you, but the issue is a lot of these charities that are set up, a lot of these, they're just PR moves. They're not really done out of a lot of moral, standing. Right now, we're seeing a rise of another type of nonprofit, the C4s, these super PACs and stuff. We're seeing people giving money to federal government officials, and we have no idea where it's coming from because of a lot of these C4s that are taking this money.
There are plenty of examples of people who break the law and misuse existing mechanisms to do bad things. And they might do it within charities, but I'd argue they do it within government a lot more, because they have the actual power to.
No, I agree with you there. My thing is, I've just seen enough, I think, of a lot of, insider DC kind of stuff, and, a way a lot of these nonprofits and even these charities works, and a lot of charities who do good things, but their initial intent is almost never to actually provide a good social welfare. Their initial intent is, oh, I'm Jeff Bezos and I'm giving, $10 million to, give
So
laptops
that's fair, right?
to
So
third
you're
world
saying
countries.
you're saying that Jeff Bezos, for altruistic reasons, he may be donating to charity because it's a tax break for him and because
Yep.
it looks
Yep.
good to him, right? So fine. Let's say that's true. Let's just say you're 100% accurate, and nobody gives money to charity for the altruistic reasons. They all give it simply. Let's say you're right about that, or
Right.
I know you didn't claim that as much as that, but let's say that's true.
Okay.
Who cares? It's still more effectively helping people than if you were to give that $10,000 were to be taxed. Like I don't care if Jeff Bezos is going out there and trying to make everybody think he's better than he
No,
really is.
no.
I don't care. It just doesn't matter. Like if he's going to donate that $10 million and it's going to do a better job to helping some poor person than $10 million to the government, which I 100% believe that.
See, okay,
Whatever.
yeah, here's the thing. My problem isn't that. My problem is the tax break that he gets for doing that. If you actually want to give charity and give out to these like people, okay, you can do it, but you don't need a tax break for it.
So that's a good point, right? These people aren't giving to charity because they want to. They're giving to charity because it's a tax break. And again, I don't care because I know that money not going into taxes.
Well,
I know that money going into
Ben. You're making it seem like
more effective.
You're making it seem like I'm saying that the ends don't justify the means there. Okay, like you're trying to make it seem like I'm saying that these programs or these charities help people doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that's great. I'm just saying do it.
No, I know your point.
And I think that speaks to a bigger, larger societal issue that you and I are probably going to get into at some point later on. But I actually want to get to talking about Jo Jorgensen, who is the Libertarian candidate for president of the United States. She's on the ballot on every single state in the country. And she's been getting a lot of traction, especially with a lot of disgruntled conservatives, a lot of libertarians who may have voted for Gary Johnson this time have definitely gone on the Jo Jorgensen bandwagon. And her internet presence is actually kind of stunning when you look at it. I've seen like so many memes of Jo Jorgensen coming from, a lot of people. It's kind of insane. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about, who she is or what some of her main policies are?
Right. So again, I'm not super familiar with her, but what I do know about her is that she's never held an elected position before, and she's operated in terms of like administration. She's been in business, and she's a pretty interesting background. But then, right, it gets to this point where the Libertarians have a nominating convention just like every other party, and it's a very, very weird party because you don't even have the mainstream Libertarians like myself.
Right.
You have these Libertarians that make me look moderate, right? You have these Libertarians that are like,
oh God,
okay, you have these exactly, and the Libertarians are like, okay, yeah, we don't need driver's licenses. And although I one time had that discussion with you just because I enjoyed
you enjoyed the meme. You can say it.
Meme, right? I enjoyed playing devil's advocate. These guys really don't believe that there should be driver's licenses, right? They don't believe there should be any form of taxes. And while I agree with them in principle, I don't agree with them in practicality. And from a pragmatic perspective, that those things will never be accomplished. And so when I look at a candidate like Jo Jorgensen, right, and I look at a candidate like Gary Johnson, who was booed off the stage for saying that he would support driver's license at the Libertarian convention, I can't take any of these Libertarian candidates seriously anymore. And I think I've learned my lesson after Gary Johnson to not even put my effort into them. Now, let me say to anybody who's listening out there now, if you want to vote for a third party, I encourage it simply because a protest vote is a good thing to do right now when both parties consistently are putting up some of the most unelectable and unpopular candidates of all time.
Right.
But don't go ahead and vote for those candidates if you genuinely want them to be in that office, because they never will be.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go that far because you're talking about protest vote, and that's the only incentive for you to go vote for these third parties. It's not just that, actually. One huge thing that's stopping these third parties from gaining momentum and getting closer to even being in the same bubble as the mainstream is public funding. And public funding, it doesn't make the difference right away, but it begins that process to start to make your party more mainstream, get more traction, get more funding, which is one huge thing that's holding a lot of these people and these parties back.
Okay, but what should be the threshold? What should be the threshold for public funding?
The threshold is 5%. If you get 5% nationally, you open up public funding for your campaigns, public funding for your conventions, public funding for your elections.
Gary Johnson was never close to 5%, and he was. I mean, like Ross Perot, for example, right? I think he's the last third-party candidate to actually make a dent.
I think he ran as an independent though, so I don't know if that actually affected any third party.
No, he might have ran. He ran as an independent, but I think he ran under the banner of some strange party from Texas. I can't remember the exact scenario, exactly what it was. But
it was the Reform Party. The Reform Party.
The Reform Party.
All right, let's shift gears now and talk about, something that's very prevalent in the news. Obviously, on Friday, we learned of the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and her opening has created a political dilemma in the Senate because Mitch McConnell has chosen to move forward with a nomination. And a lot of people are pointing to the hypocrisy of this when in 2016, towards the end of Barack Obama's term, going into an election year, Mitch McConnell said it would not be appropriate to nominate a justice and for the Senate to move on that nomination until the next president had been selected by the people. And going into the end of Trump's first term, you're seeing a lot of people call out the Republican Party for hypocrisy. You're seeing a lot of people call out people like Lindsey Graham, Chuck Grassley, and others, and are saying, you said you're not going to move on a nomination in this scenario. We need you to keep your word. And so far, we've had Senator Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins come out and say that they will not, for sure, they will not move on a nomination before the election. The Democrats still need two more. One could come in the form of Mark Kelly if he wins the hotly contested Arizona special election in November, which would see him get sworn in before the end of the year because it's a special election. So, Ben, just give me your take on what's going on with that and how that might affect the election.
Yeah, I mean, the politics of it is certainly interesting, and it's also, it can be pretty contentious, and we'll see if it even comes to a vote. I guess it will depend on, some of those other key Republican senators, that you mentioned, and, also Senator Mitt Romney, and things of that nature. But I think what really stands out is the hypocrisy of the Republican and the Democratic Party. What you're seeing is the two major parties, typically like they always do, say one thing, and then as time ellipses and time passes, do another. So the Republicans, right, they're getting called out, and it's pretty easy to see why, because you had senators like Lindsey Graham say, use my words against me in 4 years. You had, you had Republicans just simply saying, the will of the people should prevail in an election year. Mm-hmm. Right. But then you had the Democrats saying the exact opposite thing. You had the Democrats saying, hey, listen, you had Ruth Bader Ginsburg saying, hey, the president doesn't stop being the president just because it's the last year of their term. Right. And so in my opinion, Merrick Garland should be on the Supreme Court right now. And so should whoever Trump's justice pick be. Mm-hmm. Because the bottom line is, I don't think that by restricting the executive power to appoint a Supreme Court justice in the last year, that's effective for our democracy, that's effective for, our constitutional republic. And I also think that the blatant hypocrisy is just another example of how frustrated, I personally am with the two parties. Right. And I also think it's a pretty good example of like the fractionalization of our politics. And it really saddens me, when like you see the passing of, Senator McCain, or you see the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you see the reaction on social media of so many people that be like, okay, well, I don't care that they had a tremendous, service to American life. They disagreed with me, so I'm happy to see them gone. And that sort of like disgusting perception of, like people that have, put their lives toward our country, I think is something that really disgusts me.
And to put that into perspective, Mitch McConnell didn't wait 2 hours before releasing a statement where he said that he was going to move on the nomination process.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to defend Senator McConnell, but he did. I think he did it pretty soon after Justice Scalia's death too, and I don't think it was good in either scenario. But I don't think that is necessarily an example of partisanship. Probably just an example of bad taste in both cases.
That's fair enough. Well, like, I mean, my biggest problem is, I think that, you know, like we're two pretty wonky people. We like to break down like the analytics and, you know, the theories behind a lot of politics, but I think it's very important to remember at the end of the day, these people that we elect to higher office, they're not there to be politicians. They're there to be public servants first. They're not there for power. They're supposed to be there to serve the people. And that gets lost in a lot of DC politics because you see that there's only two things that run DC. It's power and money. So the only two things that people in that city care about, the only two things that the DC elite care about. And until we get past both of those, until we get, I think, things like campaign finance reform passed, and until we de-incentivize the thirst for power and the thirst for money, until we do that, we're not going to see this hypocritical hyperpartisanship end.
Yeah, I mean, I see the pros and the cons for, election finance reform. From a libertarian perspective, there was the Supreme Court decision that essentially said that, dollars are speech and, the ability of citizens to exercise their speech and the ability of citizens to put their money where they want in political campaigns is one and the same. And so I don't know if I necessarily agree with the court in that scenario, but I do think that, I see the pros and the cons, but I also think that taking money out of politics to the extreme and not letting people, donate to what they want to donate to might end up causing more harm than good.
There's a way to do that also. Andrew Yang, who I've named dropped a few times on his podcast, he's put out the idea of democracy dollars, which essentially you would give each U.S. citizen, I believe he said something along the lines of $100 in democracy dollars, and they would be able to spend that money in any way they wanted towards political campaigns. And that speaks to the bigger idea of, public funded elections. And I don't want to get into that with you right now, but, there's a lot of different theories out there. There's also theories of limiting who can donate to which campaigns based on the state that you live in, limiting super PACs and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a few ways to address it, but I think generally you and I agree on the idea that the influence of money and the influence of power has become too great, and we need to find ways to, we probably disagree on the ways to do that, but we need to find some ways to de-incentivize those kind of things.
Right. And not to get too institutional, about it, but that can't be fixed without a constitutional amendment, I don't think. Because with a Supreme Court decision enforcing that perspective, you really can't change it without a constitutional amendment.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. So just putting a bow on all of this, I asked this question to everyone who comes on the podcast. So as a libertarian, what to you is the most important issue on the line in 2020?
It has to be the fractionalization of our politics in our society. I think that worries me the most. Although that might be something that comes from, having worked on an independent campaign and having worked for a centrist and, constantly listening to the pros of a democracy that functions from the middle, it really concerns me how distant we are, and how social media, impacts our ability to even see the same facts and see the same set of stories. And, I think the path we're going down now, where we're not even agreeing on the same basic story and having a different perspective, but we're not even seeing the same things, is really dangerous. And although that isn't necessarily a libertarian concern, and it might be more of a centrist concern, it does frighten me.
Yeah, and especially going into election where we've seen that the current president has said that he won't accept the result that's not the result on election night, and that's the way that the campaign is kind of moving forward. It's looking to be a very ugly election season, and the likes I don't think we've ever seen, even in 2016. So
it's a Trump phrase, man.
Yeah.
Oof. The likes of which we've never seen. Next thing you're going to be telling me, from the standpoint of water, it's the wettest thing we've ever seen.
So, Ben, what's your message to voters who say they don't know who to vote for?
Message for voters who say they don't know who to vote for. I know who I'm voting for, but it's not a candidate that I'm in love with, and it's not a candidate that I'm happy to cast my vote for, and certainly not a candidate I feel comfortable telling anybody else to vote for. So I'll probably just leave it at that. I'll know that's unsatisfying, and I apologize. It's probably the most I can do.
Hey, well, that's your right as an American citizen, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. There it is.
All right. Ben Birnbach, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It's been a pleasure having you. I'm definitely going to have you back soon because we definitely have some issues we need to work out and talk about amongst ourselves. So where can the people find you? Is there any cause that you want to shout out?
I prefer that people don't find me, and in terms of causes I'd like to shout out, I just think if you go to Voluntarism in Action, it's just a couple groups on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and basically the idea is it's libertarians putting money where their mouth is and saying, okay, we're not going to have taxes to fund every social ill, but here's some real problems that you can fund as an individual to make some real impact in individuals' lives. And if you're looking to actually make an impact on a person-to-personal level, which is, from my perspective, the only way you really can make an impact, I would really recommend checking that out. That's Voluntarism in Action.
Ben Birnbach, thank you again for coming on. Pleasure talking to you. And thank you guys for listening. This has been Omer 2020. Check back with us next week where we're going to have our pre-debate episode. We're going to have a very special guest on to talk about everything going into the debate. Also, be sure to follow our new YouTube channel. The link is going to be in the description below. And as always, be sure to follow me at OmerQ_ for updates on the show.